Phonology is a branch of linguistics that deals with the structure and form of the words in a language. And all words can be divided into two categories: content words and function words. Content words are words that have a clear lexical meaning. This class is composed of nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. They are words for people, things, actions, ideas, and attributes. Content words are considered an open class because new words can be added and indeed are added to this category. Due to changes in technology, we've added words such as dumb phone and blog. Changing fashion trends have given us shooties and jeggings. We've added new words to describe food and food eaters, such as frankenfood or locavore. Social media has given us words such as defriend and tweeps. And the list could go on. Function words, on the other hand, do not have a clear lexical meaning, but do serve a functional purpose in a language. These are words such as conjunctions, articles, prepositions, and pronouns. Function words are considered a closed class, because generally speaking, we do not make additions to this category. When was the last time you've seen a new preposition? Words are all around us. We write them, we speak them, we think them. Some words are made up of one piece, but many other words are made up of more than one piece, more than one component, and these components are called morphemes. A morpheme is a minimal unit of meaning, so while some words can consist of one morpheme and thus be minimal units of meaning in and of themselves, most words consist of more than one morpheme. The word peace has one morpheme and thus cannot be broken down into smaller units of meaning. Peaceful has two morphemes. Peace, a state of harmony that exists during the absence of war, plus full, a suffix meaning full of something. Peacefully has three morphemes: peace plus full plus ly, because ly in and of itself holds the meaning of in the manner of. So really, peacefully contains three units of meaning that when combined together give us the meaning of the word as a whole. Obviously, words can have a lot more than three morphemes. Anti-disestablishmentarianism has a total of 7, and there are words with even more than that. We should keep in mind that some morphemes can be used by themselves. These are called free morphemes. They're not dependent on any other morpheme to complete their meaning. Open class content words such as girl, fish, tree, and love are all considered free morphemes, as are closed class function words such as the, and, for, or it. Other morphemes cannot be used by themselves and are dependent on other morphemes. These are called bound morphemes. And bound morphemes are further divided into two categories: affixes and bound roots. Bound roots are roots that cannot be used by themselves. For example, sieve in receive, conceive, and deceive cannot stand on its own. I cannot sieve something. Affixes are morphemes that can be added to the front of a word, a prefix such as pre, re, dis, or un, to the end of a word, a suffix such as an, is, al, or li, or in other languages to the middle of the word called infixes, or to both sides of the word called circumfixes. And affixes can be divided into two categories of their own. Wait, what? Yeah. How about we take a moment to review first. Morphemes are the basic units of meaning. Morphemes can be divided into two classes: bound morphemes and free morphemes. Free morphemes include open class content words, such as cute, dog, run, away, and closed class function words, such as the, on, yet, and he. Bound morphemes can be divided into two categories: affixes and roots. Bound roots, such as sieve, cannot be used by themselves. Affixes, in English, are the prefixes and suffixes that we add to the beginning or ending of a word, and are further divided into derivational affixes and inflectional affixes. Derivational affixes are affixes that when added to a word create a new word with a new meaning. They're called derivational precisely because a new word is derived when they're added to the original word. And many times these newly created words belong to a new grammatical category. Some affixes turn nouns into adjectives, like beauty to beautiful. Some change verbs into nouns, like sing to singer. Some change adjectives to adverbs, like precise to precisely. Still others turn nouns to verbs, adjectives to nouns, and verbs to adjectives. Other affixes do not change the grammatical category of the word they're added to. King plus dumb goes from noun to noun. Do plus re goes from verb to verb. Blue plus ish goes from adjective to adjective. We use derivational affixes constantly, and they're a very important part of English because they help us to form the majority of words that exist in our language. In English, all of the inflectional affixes are suffixes that when added to the end of the word don't change its meaning, or at least not in any large sense. Instead, they change things like the person, tense, and number of a word. And in English, there are a total of 8. The third person singular s, such as Anakin kills younglings. The past tense ed, such as Ron kissed Hermione. The progressive ing, such as Han is falling into the Sarlacc pit. The past participle en, such as the Emperor has fallen and cannot get up. The plural s, such as vampires make the worst boyfriends. The possessive s, such as that's Luke's hand, isn't it? The comparative er, such as Picard is cooler than Kirk. And the superlative est, such as that's the sweetest thing I've ever seen. Compared to other languages, English has very few inflectional affixes, but they serve their purpose well nonetheless.
What's the difference between inflection and derivation? Let's have a look at some examples. Trees consists of two morphemes, tree and s. Walked consists of two morphemes as well, walk and ed. Writer consists of write and r. And unlikely, well, consists of un and like and ly. But in this case, unlikely, we're just going to focus on these two elements, un and likely. Let's look at these in pairs. The first two of our examples, trees and walked, can be divided up in the following way. Tree is a noun and s is a plural marker. Walked, walk is a verb and ed is the marker for the past tense. These are grammatical elements. Now the other two examples are quite different. Writer consists of a verb to write and of some sort of element er or r that indicates that this is a noun. So write, the verb, turns into a noun, a writer. It's a change in word class. Unlikely similarly changes meaning. So likely is an adjective, a likely event. An unlikely event is a totally different thing. It's still an adjective, but the meaning is now the opposite. So likely and unlikely differ in meaning, even though they don't differ in word class. Right, so let's start with our grammatical morphemes. This is what we call inflection. The grammatical morphemes do not change the meaning. Rather, they add some sort of grammatical information, as in ed, the past tense, in walked, or the s of houses or apples, the s adding to a noun that indicates plural. And there are lots of other categories that we could list here that would fall under the heading of inflection. Now, the other types of elements, those morphemes that indicate lexical meaning, are called derivation. And these always change the meaning of the word they attach to. So in the case of write and writer, we had a change from an action to a person who's doing that action. And in the case of likely and unlikely, we had the change from something positive to something negative. Now, derivation can also change the word class, but doesn't always have to do so. So likely, unlikely remain adjectives, even though there is derivation, whereas write, writer, we see a change in the word class from the verb to write to the noun writer. And that's basically it. Thank you very much for listening.
First, let's start by defining what is a natural language. A natural language is formally defined as any language that arises unpremeditated in the brains of human beings. Essentially, most languages that you ever spoken/heard of fall in this category. But in case you're a little confused, here are some examples in order of decreasing formality. British English, African American Vernacular English, Leet Speak. All of these are natural languages. Note that regulating a language does not diminish its natural status. Another important way of defining what a natural language is to contrast it against constructed languages. All computer languages and formal languages such as C and regex are constructed. There are also several spoken constructed languages, such as Esperanto, a language designed to be easy to pronounce and globally adopted, and Klingon, which is designed to be imperial, aggressive, and survive the harsh vacuum of space. Now to define what is natural language processing. And natural language processing is a little less succinctly defined due to it being a vastly multidisciplinary field. But a common interpretation of it is any work in computer science, artificial intelligence, or computational linguistics that deals with natural languages. Or a bit more simply, dealing with meaningful interactions between computer software and human languages. Note that yelling at your code when it's segfaulting is not an example of NLP. But some examples of NLP in your life are Google Translate. Google Translate uses machine translation algorithms which are based on statistical resolution to gain meaning from your text. And they perform these statistical resolution algorithms on source material like UN documents, which are translated into multiple different languages at a time. This happens every time you use Google Translate to do your foreign language homework. Siri is another good example of natural language processing in your life. Siri uses speech-to-text and text-to-speech algorithms to take vocal commands and output the results of her operation/answer to your query in plain English. Pretty cool. And Watson the Jeopardy bot is capable of analyzing Jeopardy clues and using several hundred language processing algorithms in parallel, form an answer based off of 15 terabytes of knowledge that's just stored in a database somewhere, and can generally do this fast when you pick your nose.
Alright, so now we're going to tie it all into CS301. What are finite state transducers? Finite state transducers are state machines with two tapes. These two tapes are an input tape and an output tape. Unlike the finite state automatons that we're used to in class, which only have one tape. So here we have an example on the right. We go from state 0. In the input tape we read A, and then on the output tape we write B. Then we go to state 1, which goes to state 3, the final state, where we read in H and then output H on the output tape. Same thing down here, reads A, outputs C, reads E, outputs E, and goes to the final state. So what is morphology? Morphology is the study of ways words are built from small units called morphemes. Morphemes are made up of two things. The stem, which is the core word, and then affixes, which either change the meaning of the word or changes the grammatical functions of the word. So here we have an example of the word unhappiness. The three morphemes are un, happy, and ness. Happy is the stem word, and then the prefix is un, and the suffix is ness. Un and ness are both affixes. So what is morphological parsing? Morphological parsing is a process of determining these morphemes. So here in our first example, the input is cats, and then after morphological parsing, we have cat plus n, which states that it's a noun, and then plus pl, which states that it's plural. And then we can look underneath cat here. We have cat plus n, which says it's a noun, and then plus sg, which says it's singular. So let's take a closer look onto those two tapes. We have the lexical and the surface. In the lexical, we have CAT plus N plus PL. And then surface is CATS, cats. And either one can be input tapes, and either one can also be output tapes. So here's an example of the regular noun transition. We have C in the input, output C, input A, output A, input T, output T, input plus N, and then it outputs an empty, and then plus PL, outputs S. And so the output string is cats altogether. And this is coming from the lexical interpretation to the surface interpretation. And here we have the simplified morphological parsing FST. So the cats example actually goes into this regular noun here, goes to Q1, then plus N, which outputs an empty, goes to Q4. If it's singular, there's a pound symbol in the input string, which goes to the final state. If there's a plus PL, that means it's plural, so it outputs an S, and then here we have a pound, which is the end of tape. And then irregular singular nouns, so an example of that would be ox, goes through here. And then irregular plural nouns, an example would be oxen, would go through here. So why do we use FSTs and not FSAs? So generally, we use FSAs to define a set of strings, but FST determines the relationship between these set of strings. And natural language processing, it's very important to use this. So FST as a recognizer, it takes a pair of strings as input and outputs and accepts it if the string pair is in the string pair language. Otherwise, it rejects it. FST as a generator outputs pairs of strings of the language and also outputs yes or no. FST as a set relator computes relation between these sets. And FST as a translator reads a string in and outputs another string. Morphological parsing is an example of a translator because it inputs a string of letters and then outputs a string of morphemes.
So the main difference between a finite automaton and a transducer is that a transducer has both an input and an output, right? By conventional notation, the alphabet in front here, you can see it's the input, and the letter next to it will be an output. So for example, if you consider the path 0, 1, 1, 2, 5, right? This path 0, 1, 1, 2, 5 will require a input of A, B, B, C, D, and it will return a output of Z, Y, Y, X, W. Now, why is that? So if you look here, if you will take this path, this transition, you require an A, and require a B, and require another B, require a C, and finally requiring a D in order to reach the end state. So in the process, the transducer will return a Z, two Ys, an X, and a W here, right? So this is basically what a finite state transducer is. Now, a formal definition of a finite transducer is that it's instead of a 5-tuple, it's written as a 6-tuple. The difference is again of course of the inputs and the outputs. So you can see now instead of having A as one single alphabet, now you have two sets of input labels and output labels. Now the rest are mostly the same except for the set of state transitions. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, before moving on, I have to clear up this notation. Now, for example, if I consider a walk of 0, 1, 2, 5, right? This path 0, 1, 2, 5 formally is written as this. It's written as 0 AZ1, then 1 CX2, and 2 DW5. Right? You can see each bracket here, each pair of brackets here represent one transition, one arrow. So as you can see, the four tuple has the same format as the Cartesian product of the four sets here. Q being the set of all possible states, and this is the all possible inputs, all possible outputs, and again all possible states. So you can see it starts at some state, has some input, has a output, and it reaches another state, right? So this is basically what this Cartesian product actually means. It actually captures all the information of all the parameters involved in a single transition, right? So for a WFST, a weighted finite state transducer, right? Each transition, initial state and final state, now has an additional weight component to it. So you can see that this initial state here has a weight of 0.5, and this end state here has a weight of 0.1. Now, what these weight means will be discussed later on, but it could mean a variety of things, from cost to penalty to probability and so on and so forth, right? And you can see that each transition now also carries an extra weight here. Now, if we were to consider the same path of 0, 1, 1, 2, and 5, the input, of course, is A, B, B, C, D. We established that. And the output will be Z, Y, Y, X, W. Now, on top of returning a output, a weighted finite state transducer also returns the weight of the path. So in this case, it's the product of all the weights involved in the path. So 0.5 multiplied by 1.2, 0.7, 0.7, 3, 2, and 0.1. So you can see it's really the weight of this path. Now, what does this symbol means? It will be introduced a little bit later on after we learn more about semi-rings and so on and so forth, right? So the more formal definition is that a weighted finite state transducer is an 8-tuple. The difference between a finite state transducer and a weighted one is that now it has extra two components of a initial weight function and a final weight function. So you can see that this maps all initial states to a particular weight, right? And all final state to a particular weight. And of course, you can see there's a slight change in the set of state transitions. So you can see now it's a 5-tuple instead of the previous 4-tuple. And that's because, again, each transition has an extra weight here, right? So you can see here, consider the same walk, 0, 1, 2, 5, right? The path now will be returned formally as this. Instead of 0, A, Z, 1, 1, C, X, 2, so on and so forth, there's an additional weight component to it. Again, we are trying to capture as much information as possible, and therefore each transition has a format of this Cartesian product of these 5 sets, right? So this is, you can see that this is the main difference between a weighted and an unweighted finite state transducer. Just note that the final state and the initial state will have an additional weight, right? And each transition will be weighted as well, right? So these are the main differences. On top of that, there are many others type of finite automaton. So for example, in the first lecture, you know that there is this thing known as the finite state acceptor, where there's a particular input, and if there's a path that starts from the initial state and ends in the final state, it will return a true or 1, right? So this is known as a finite state acceptor. Now, I've introduced what a transducer is, right? A transducer is that if it has a particular input, and if there's a path that starts from the initial state and ends in the final state, it will have an output as well. And similarly for weighted finite state transducer, right? Not only it has an output, it outputs the weight of the particular path as well. And finally, the weighted finite state acceptor, it's sort of the same as an acceptor. Instead of returning true, if there is a path, it returns the weight of the path, right? So these are the 4 main finite automaton that we will be working with in these few lectures. And finally, these are some of the special names that we give to special transducers, right? For example, the first one would be deterministic transducer. So we call a transducer T is that is deterministic if there are no two transitions leaving the same state sharing the same input label. It just means that for all the arrows coming out from the circles, there is no same input, because if there are two different arrows that use the same input, clearly you cannot tell where is the path going to end up, and that's why we say that if there are no two transitions leaving the same state, we call the transducer deterministic. And of course, another very important definition is a sequential transducer. So a transducer T is sequential if there's a unique initial state, which means that there's just one initial state. And a functional transducer is that it's basically a one-to-one map. For any input X, right? There's a unique output Y, right? And what is epsilon transitions? Well, epsilon transition is that if there's a state transition that can be made without using any input, right? We say that the transducer has epsilon transitions in it. And of course, the final thing is that something known as a stochastic weighted finite state transducer. So for every state, right, the sum of all the transition weights are exactly one. So it's the reason why stochastic is used because it's basically a probabilistic weighted finite state transducer where all the arrows have outgoing weights of the sum of the outgoing weights is exactly one, right? So these are some of the definitions that you will run into again in this course. So just take note of them.